Hi, and for those of you who are new here, welcome to my channel. I'm Ella, and I'm multiply neurodivergent with diagnoses of autism, ADHD and dyspraxia. I also have a physical disability called EDS. I talk about all these things and disability life in general, so if that's something that you'd like to hear more about, then please subscribe to my channel. Today I wanted to take some time to talk about my experience of taking ADHD medication as a late diagnosed adult, the good and the bad. So let's get into it. I was diagnosed with ADHD in the autumn of 2020 after receiving my autism diagnosis in 2016. Now that I know more about ADHD, it's fairly flipping obvious that I have it, but it did take my daughter's diagnosis for me to realise. I have combined type ADHD, which means that I have traits of inattention and hyperactivity. And to be honest, I feel like I have really strong ADHD traits, which, unbeknownst to me, were a massive barrier for me for reaching my goals. I have always struggled to focus, and I am restless a lot. This impacted my education and my career prospects, as well as just making it harder to be a functioning adult. Additionally, I have severe emotional dysregulation and I regularly experience emotional flooding. This is when ADHD brains are flooded with a strong emotion and it's really difficult to handle. In fact, for me, the emotional regulation difficulty is the hardest part of my ADHD. This has had a massive impact on me managing relationships and career progression, and it's also had a really negative impact on my mental health. Before I was diagnosed, I didn't realise that emotional dysregulation is a trait of ADHD, and once I knew, I was really keen to try medication to see if it can help me regulate my emotions. So after my diagnosis, I started taking methylphenidate. This is commonly known as Ritalin and is one of the stimulant medication options for ADHD. Initially, I received my ADHD diagnosis from a private service, and it was a nurse from this private service that took me through the initial titration process. Titration is about finding the right medication and the right dose for you. Unfortunately, the nurse responsible for my titration was, to be completely honest, a bit rubbish. So I basically ended up asking for the same medication that my daughter takes because they weren't really offering any good suggestions. I also ended up choosing my own dose, like the whole thing was not good, but at least I ended up with some medication. Eventually, I was seen by my local NHS ADHD service, but to be honest, they didn't really offer me any other suggestions for meds, so I just kind of carried on taking what I was already taking. So the context of this video is that I haven't actually found the ideal medication and dose for me just yet, and I'm actually in the process of trying to make an appointment with my ADHD doctor for a medication review. But that's not to say that the meds haven't had a positive impact. They have, so let's start by talking about that. Many people, when they talk about ADHD meds, talk about an aha moment on the first day that they take them, and I can't say that that was my experience. It was more of a gradual realisation, noticing small positive changes in the way that I was handling life as time on the meds went on. The first time that I noticed the meds working was about a week after I'd started taking them. I had purchased a new camera and I was in the process of unpacking it and figuring out how it worked. It was the end of the day and I was tired, and very quickly, as often happens for me, I started to get quite frustrated with this process. Usually, if this had happened, I would have just carried on trying to make it work until eventually I had a meltdown. Instead, it was like there was a little voice in my head that told me, Ella, you're getting a little bit frustrated with this right now. You're probably tired. Maybe you should put it to one side for now and go and do something relaxing. So I did, which probably doesn't sound like that much of a big deal to you, but for me, I had avoided what would have been an inevitable meltdown, and this felt massive. It felt amazing to have a functioning inner voice able to make a good decision in that moment. And this was the start of experiencing what I now call the pause point. The point between something happening and me responding, in which I get time to think about how I want to respond. And I had literally never experienced this pause point until I started taking medication. I didn't even know that the pause point existed. The pause point is essential. It stops me doing and saying things that I will later regret. It gives me control over my actions and my words. So yeah, now I have this pause point, at least while my meds are working, and that's a really big deal. The other change that I have noticed since starting medication is that I can focus more easily and for longer periods of time, meaning that I can work for less time and get more done because I'm not being distracted by a million things when I'm trying to work. And I'm a better listener when in conversations because my mind is not wandering around so much, which gives me a chance to strengthen and deepen my relationships. The meds also help with my impulsivity, and this impacts two areas. One of them is my issue with addiction. Now, I want to be clear, I am still battling that addiction, but the progress that I've been able to make since on meds has been massive. I've been able to abstain for much longer periods of time because of the meds' impact on my impulsivity, so I'm not impulsively partaking without being able to think the decision through. But this only works when my meds are working. So I'm still figuring out how to battle that impulsivity when my meds wear off. Also, this impact on my impulsive nature has enabled me to start to build and live a calmer life. I'm less likely to break from my schedule and overdo it because I felt restless and had to do something. Instead, I can stay at home and get the rest and the low stimulation that I need in order to stay mentally well. So overall, the medication has been really helpful, which is why I've continued to take it for the last 2 years. But they are not a perfect solution. For one thing, the formulation that I take does not last all day. I take a slow-release, long-acting formulation, which in theory should last for 8 hours. But this is just a guide. The way that we metabolize medication will impact how long they're effective for, and this varies from person to person. So I take my meds about 8:30 in the morning, and I notice them starting to wear off at about 3 p.m. So I'm still left with a huge chunk of the day during which I'm not covered. And basically, as my meds start to wear off, then I often experience significant emotional dysregulation, which can have a massive impact on that section of the day, and in the worst case scenario can lead to me being completely unable to function, particularly if something challenging happens at that time of the day. Even a minor thing at that point in the day can feel like a really big deal and set me off. I also sometimes experience anxiety as my meds wear off, particularly if I've not been careful with my caffeine intake. Too much caffeine and the meds wearing off causes that horrible, rushy anxiety feeling, which I just really don't like. So I try to stick to one caffeinated drink a day in the morning, but I sometimes forget because, well, I've got ADHD. I've started to concentrate on rest and a low stimulation environment at the time that my meds are wearing off, and that can ease the transition for me. The anxiety is also the reason that I've not been able to increase my dose to one that might be more effective for me, because if I take any more, I experience a lot of anxiety. Another thing to bear in mind about medication is that it is not a fix for your ADHD traits. It's more a tool that gives you the space and the capacity to work on the issues that you experience in your life as a result of ADHD and to come up with strategies and ways to cope. The other aspect of ADHD medication that I wanted to talk about as an autistic person is the impact of the meds on my experience of my autism. The main thing that I've noticed is that as my meds are working and my ADHD traits are reduced, my autistic traits end up being more prominent, and this can be both a good and a bad thing. It's like my ADHD has been kind of covering for my autism, in that it helped me to overcome social anxiety because I was so keen for the stimulation of being around other people. And I was able to be more enthusiastic and take part socially because I feel like my ADHD made me more bubbly and chatty, which is reduced when I'm on my meds. In some ways, this is a good thing because I feel more in control of myself and I'm less likely to come away from a social situation feeling anxious, embarrassed, and worried about whether I've been too much. But it's also kind of a bad thing because I feel more anxious about talking to people and less inclined to be around people to begin with. I recently found myself too anxious to be able to ask in a restaurant for directions to the toilet, which is a completely new experience for me. It was like I had no words. Additionally, on my medication, I experienced my sensory processing difficulties more profoundly. They were always there, but my ADHD kept me busy and distracted from them. I still get overstimulated and I still have meltdowns, but I guess I just used to be much less likely to notice that they were impacting me until it was too late. So I suppose in a way this is both a good and a bad thing because it is quite tricky being constantly bothered by sensory processing difficulties, especially when I leave the house. And it makes accessing some louder, busy environments basically virtually impossible now. But being aware of them means that I'm more able to protect myself and, if needed, remove myself before I become massively overstimulated. The meds have had a positive impact on my experience of my special interests. I have always benefited from time with my special interests, but I would find that I would be so distractible that I would really struggle to actually spend time doing them, and definitely found it more difficult to get into flow state with them. Basically, it seems to me that when I'm on my meds, my autistic traits are more prominent and my autism seems to be in the lead, which can be both a good and a bad thing depending upon the situation. Like before, my life felt very exciting and fast and intense, like a runaway train passing through every station quickly, picking up but not processing information and never stopping. And now I'm more in my body and more in my brain, and my brain is an autistic brain, so that's what I'm experiencing. So yeah, that is my experience at this current time. As I said, I'm in the process of trying to make a doctor's appointment to see if we can find a better medication solution. And if and when that happens, I will certainly keep you updated. For now, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to like the video to please the algorithms and to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss future updates. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.